Joining us on the program is an accomplished commercial, music video, short, and feature film director, producer, and editor whose latest feature, Z, is streaming right now on SHUDDER. He is Brandon Christensen. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
We're really excited to talk to you about Z, but how we always start these off is by asking, how you got the bug for filmmaking and, kind of your early inspirations that have set you on the path for a filmmaking career.
I think a lot of people my age, they came up with a household video camera, and there was always kind of this allure to picking it up and filming. If you have siblings, just like filming them and putting them in different roles. And, my siblings and myself, we would make tiny movies like all the time. Like we had a Superman spinoff called Wonder Man, where we would my bedroom served as an office, or the basement would serve as, an alleyway somewhere. It didn't really matter because your imaginations were running wild, and you would just make these. They're horrible, but they're hilarious. And it was just like about just putting on the show. There's just something kind of compelling about being able to entertain and to just sort of be creative in that way. Like, I'm not the best drawer or best writer or anything like that, but I do, I just love to be able to point a camera at something and, try and make just something that I can watch back and finesse and kind of play with. So growing up, it was kind of always just the thing I wanted to do. And when I got through high school, I started applying to different film schools, and I got into the Toronto Film School when I was 20, and I went there for their program. And then it was just a matter of how I was going to get from that, fresh graduate with a camera, how I was going to get from there to making films. And it was, it's a long process. I started working at a production company here in Las Vegas, and very corporate and but it taught me a lot. And I was able to work with a lot of different projects, kind of constantly churning through some stuff. So it taught me a lot, and it was really valuable. But then on the side of these corporate things, you're trying to be a little bit more creative because you don't really get that. So I'd constantly be making short films and just trying to, test new things and try VFX and stuff like that, just more out of boredom than anything. And it kind of all coalesced when I started getting a little more serious with the short films. And so I think just overall, it was just something I've always wanted to do. And, luckily I've been fortunate to kind of make it part of my life.
Right. And you are native Canadian, Calgary, by way of Toronto, as you mentioned. But how did you find yourself in Las Vegas? Because that is somewhat of a random spot to make your stand for making feature films, right?
Yeah, it's super random. It's kind of a weird question. Like, whenever anyone asks where I live and I'm like Las Vegas, there's always that pause because it does sound kind of weird. I was in Toronto, and I started a production company with a friend, and we were equal parts lazy and equal parts very invested in Halo 3 at the time. So we didn't really push the company as hard as we should have. And after a year, my lease was up, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So my sister, she lived in Las Vegas at the time. She told me to come down and, take a look just check it out for myself. And so I flew down, and she got me an interview at that company that I mentioned. And they basically hired me while I was on this little vacation. So I basically went back to Toronto, packed my things, and drove a U-Haul with my girlfriend at the time, who is my wife now. We drove all the way across the country to Vegas, and I've been here for about 12 years now. And I don't know, it's interesting. I've kind of grown to enjoy it a lot more as I can get anywhere really cheaply. It's kind of nice that way. I go to LA in 4 hours. Everywhere flies through Vegas. So it's kind of this secret that not many people know about, because it's so cheap to live, so you can be comfortable while, taking a lot of career risks, which, I've had to do. And it's cool. It's weird, but it's cool.
Yeah, it's not what people think of necessarily when they think of like a filmmaking hub, but it is also one of the entertainment capitals of the world. And so I imagine that you can get a lot of work there too, outside of maybe more of your true passion projects. But I would think that there's a lot of like just general video production work happening in Vegas.
Yeah, there's a ton. I mean, just even on the corporate side, just companies are constantly coming in for trade shows and stuff like that. So there's people in town that make, really good livings just by being able to shoot trade shows and these shows that come through and all that stuff. So it's interesting because the rates are good. The cost of living is low. So that it's very easy to get comfortable here. And, there was a period where I was getting a little comfortable, and, it kind of took a big leap of faith because when you have kids and you've got a wife and you're just like, okay, I want to get into features, and you just try and take kind of that risk, and sometimes it pays off. And luckily, when I worked on It Stands the Sands Red, it kind of led to Stillborn, which led to Z, and it's been a path that I've been following now.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about collaborating with Colin Minahan, who, for those who don't know, is like part of the Vicious Brothers with Stuart Ortiz, the makers of Grave Encounters, which many horror fans know about. Did that relationship start in Vegas? Were you guys film school buds or what?
It's funny. We go back a long ways to like random filmmaking forums. This is early 2000s, 2001 or something like that, when he was just starting out to do music videos, and he was young, like 16, 17. We're about the same age, but he was always just kind of a level above where I was. Like, he was kind of a hustler and grinding through the music video scene in Canada. So I met him online, and Stuart and another guy that we all kind of became friends there. And his trajectory was very fast and rapid, where I was kind of on the sidelines watching and, inspired by him and everything. So as years went by, I went to film school. I started to get into music videos a little bit. And by that point, he was winning like, Much Music, Director of the Year type of stuff. And I was making $500 music videos. So it was just kind of, I was trying to emulate him a little bit. And it just ended up, I didn't really take off the way that he did. So we kept in touch and everything. And he went off and he made Grave Encounters. He made Grave Encounters 2, and he made Extraterrestrial. And I was kind of just, a little envious of that whole path he was taking. So when he sent me the script for It Stains and Sands Red, which took place in Las Vegas, I was just like, this is kind of serendipitous. I need to jump on this. So I was just like, hey guys, come out. Let's, run around, scout for a little bit. And, a couple of days later, they came to Vegas. We spent a couple of days driving around the desert and just going to different places that we could shoot. And like a few weeks after that, we were in pre-production. So it was very, it's kind of like cancel all my commercial and corporate work for a couple months. I'm going all in on this.
You mentioned that was kind of the genesis of what became your first feature, Stillborn. Can you talk a little bit about that process of making the leap towards your first feature and kind of how you built up that confidence? Because there's a lot of filmmakers in that boat that are maybe they're living their comfortable life at various levels of comfort probably, or maybe they have kids. There's a lot going on, and it's hard to kind of take that big jump because it's such a huge commitment and risk when you endeavor towards your first feature film. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
So with It Stains and Sands Red, it was just, it was a grueling, low budget, no money shoot where we were driving 3 hours to and from set every day for 4 weeks. And it was incredibly hellish. But as the final product starts to shape together, and there's so many conversations that have been had about, what do we want to do next? It was just a lot of conversations with Colin about let's give Brandon a shot, because I've done a bunch of short films. I've kind of done a ton of commercials and stuff. It's not like I'm coming from nothing, but we just started talking about a potential Blumhouse style of horror film, like very few locations, things like that. And I had this seed of an idea of a woman that is giving birth to 2 kids, and one of them passes, and she's just left with this emptiness where half of her life makes sense and the other half doesn't. And it was just this visual of a woman sitting with one baby in between 2 cribs that I talked to Colin about, and we just started developing it. And it was incredibly rapid. And I think, it was a good relationship because it fostered a lot of creativity without, there was never that like, that's a dumb idea, what are you thinking? Even the bad ideas were encouraged because they could end up going to good ideas. I totally get the confidence thing, because so often when you're working alone, especially, you can put your heart and soul into something or on the page, and you share it with someone and it just doesn't connect. So, it's scary. And even now I'm writing a script that it's always challenging to show people because you don't really know how they're going to take it. And even if you're confident in it, you need to sort of exude that confidence to them because when you're doing these things, you're not just making something good or bad. You're also selling yourself, and you're selling the product to the people because they have to believe in you to work with you. And so it's tough, and it takes a lot of work to just sort of build that part of you where you can do that. But, Colin was a good person to work with because he's got endless confidence. So it was kind of nice to just be able to spend a couple months just bouncing ideas back and forth and creating Stillborn. So, that was another case where it was just, we had the script and we wanted to do it right away. So we linked up with Kurt Harder and Chris Ball, who were producers in Calgary, where I'm originally from. And it was just another one of those cases of just sort of things lined up. And my brother was having a baby at the time, so it let us use their baby in the movie. And my parents, we were able to shoot in their house for the film. And so it was just a bunch of things that all just sort of worked out at the exact kind of moment that if we had done it, 5 months earlier, 5 months later, these things wouldn't have really worked. So sometimes there's these signs that are there and you just, you have to just grab them and go with them.
I was about to ask, was that his brand new baby on screen? Because you did use a brand new baby in Stillborn. You answered that for me though. So.
It was my niece, Grace is her name. And she was very brand new. We basically scheduled the production around her birth because, which isn't totally legal, but you're supposed to be X amount of days. And let's just say that we waited the proper amount of time before we could shoot. Legally, we waited that long, but technically maybe not.
Well, I'm sure it turned out better than the American Sniper route.
Yeah, that was, I mean, we had a fake baby on set at all times,
sure.
But, my brother and my sister-in-law were so good about being there and having the baby there as much as possible that it's never actually on screen. So we would often do the blocking and the lighting and stuff around this baby that we called Santiago. And then we would drop in the real baby. But we tried to make it so we'd shoot out the baby first and then, send them home. These horror films, they often are overnights. And so it sucks when, your brother or your sister-in-law have to be there until 3 a.m., 4 a.m. with the baby. It's just, movies are grueling. And when they're just sort of, bystanders and just supporting because they're family, it's, it's challenging for sure.
And I'm sensing a theme with some of your films here, with both deal with parents and a young child, and both with Stillborn and Z. And I imagine that comes from some sort of a real place, being a parent, which you talked about earlier, kind of having that confidence. You need to really believe in a story, and I think some of it comes from perhaps having that sort of deeper connection to the material that maybe only Shauna and I are both parents too, so we can totally relate to that, I guess, unique dynamic between a parent and a child and seeing how that plays on screen.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people say, write what you know. Being a parent and seeing sort of the daily struggle of being a parent, when you step back from the actual responsibilities of parenting and see, what kind of stories can come from these things that I've gone through, these moments where you're sitting in bed and you're looking at your baby in a baby monitor and you start having these conversations like, what are the worst possible things that could happen in this moment that seems so calm and serene and it's just a very peaceful baby sleeping? And then you go, well, what if someone just reached into the crib? They're on the other side of the house. I'm over here, totally defenseless. That's a terrifying thought as a parent. And so you go, oh, that's interesting. And you start developing that idea a little bit more. Well, who's grabbing this baby? And you kind of go down that road. So I think, I'm just, a lot of the time is just taking what is in front of you and trying to put a little twist on it to see if it's, it's interesting. Because there's a lot of people in the world that all have unique kind of point of views of things that they're experiencing. And to them, it might be that they're, very kind of banal or boring, but with the right kind of spin on it, it could be fairly interesting. That's why there's so many great coming of age stories or stories that are, incredibly simple, but, they work because you've got these unique characters and people that are going through something that isn't really the normal for most of your audience and stuff. So I think with parenting especially, and it's so attractive to me because it's ever changing. When I wrote Stillborn, my middle child now, he was about 1. So I was just kind of through the baby phase. And then when we went into Z, my oldest had just started kindergarten. So that was like a whole different experience that I was dealing with. And it led to a lot of new discoveries on kind of what are some scary things about parenting.
So it sounds like a coming of age story is next because you're following the progression of your children, right?
Yeah, I need to figure out the next sort of the 10-year-old. What's the big crisis there? We'll see. He's 8 right now, so I've got a couple years before I get into the double digits, and then I'll have to write something where maybe like a Cub Scouts or something like that.
Right.
Who knows?
So even if your follow-up movies aren't necessarily better than your past movies, you hope they are, but I think you certainly grow as a director movie to movie. Is there something you could say from the first time you did that with Colin to your 2 features now? Like, have you learned any major lessons that you applied to Z from Stillborn or from your prior, commercial or short work?
I think preparation is such a big thing. On Stillborn, you feel like you're prepared all the time, but when you're doing low budget, any size production, there's always endless curveballs. That's one of the biggest parts of being a director is just being prepared enough that you don't have to think too hard when there's a curveball thrown at you. You can kind of just react because you've built these situations, kind of the fail points of the production and where things might go wrong. So you're able to pivot pretty easily. I think on Stillborn, it was tough to kind of deal with a lot of things because you have this vision in your head and you're not as malleable and able to kind of change on the fly. Whereas on Z, I felt like it's more focusing on the right things, like not worrying about a little detail like the color of something on the frame or something like that, but just really kind of focusing on things that are important, which is the story of the characters and what they're going through. So as long as if the change dictates something, if it's something story related, really focus on that because the story is the most important thing. What a character, a line, a dialogue or two ultimately don't matter if the story and what, the heart of what they're talking about is still intact. And I think that was a big thing that I learned going from movie to movie, and still, it's something that I'm still trying to improve on, is just figuring out a way to change your approach to something on the day when you're filming. Because just because you have it in your head a specific way, it might not be the best way. And so it's being able to allow other people's voices in and give you some ideas and really kind of consider them carefully and give them the proper weight to the conversation that you guys are having on set. Because ultimately you're working with professionals that have great ideas, and being able to capitalize that is so important. I mean, Stillborn wouldn't exist without kind of allowing a lot of the things that were around me to kind of influence it into happening. So you just sometimes have to shut up and listen and see what's right for the project. And I think I'm getting better at that.
I think one of the things that really impressed me about Z was how well you crafted the scares. And when I say scares, I think a lot of people will think of like jump scares, and not that there's anything wrong with jump scares. I don't know why they get such a bad rap, but I don't really want to like cheapen it. Like Z has a few moments that legitimately like surprise or shock the viewer, and they're super effective. And I think in order to achieve something like that, it requires so much collaboration across the different departments, as you mentioned. It's cinematography, it's sound, it's score, it's editing. I'd love to dig in a little bit more about kind of the craft of the scare with you, without giving away any spoilers. Can you talk a little bit about your process in creating those for Z?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, timing is kind of everything with scares. I think I know the one in particular that you're probably referring to, but it's funny because, on the page, and even when you're filming, scary is not really scary. Like when you've got a giant, skinny, naked dude on set, it's more awkward than it's scary for everyone, because he's doing these weird gyrations with his hips and all these things are happening, and there's lighting effects happening, and it kind of seems silly. So you have to kind of find a way to objectively remove yourself from, seeing exactly what's happening so you can experience it as an audience. And I think, that's the biggest thing, is having empathy for your audience, where you can go, okay, so this is what's happening in the story here. It's a mother talking to another mother, for example, about the troubling things that have been happening in her household with her kid, and how her kids, she just can't work with them anymore, and he's taken on a life of his own. And it's, you're just sort of pulling the audience in one direction, and then all of a sudden you snap back to the other side. I think a lot of it is about misdirection and just sort of contrast. Like, I think when you look at Jordan Peele's movies, there's a lot of humor in them, and that makes you kind of loosen up as an audience a little bit. You're like, oh, that's funny. But then there's something really shocking and jarring, and you're just like, oh my God, I wasn't ready for that. And it's kind of playing these two. It's like you're taking a rubber band and you're snapping it back, and it's just, you have this comfortable feeling that you're like, okay, I'm way over here. Then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm way on the other end. So it's taking these contrasts of, emotions and just sort of trying to manipulate them as much as you can to go from one side to the other. And I think that helps a lot with scares. And that's why I think juxtaposition of something like a clown, like Pennywise or something like that, is so scary, because it's supposed to be nice and friendly, but there's this weird thing about it that you just don't trust. And I think that in general with like Z, when you're dealing with two different viewpoints with people that are kind of perceiving things differently, you've got Josh who sees this monster as friendly and it's, not threatening at all. And then you see Beth, and she sees the monster that it is. It's just kind of how you perceive things can totally change the way that you experience something. So I think it's, playing with those type of things. And then obviously when you're in post-production and you're editing them, it's always challenging to just sort of figure out exactly when that moment hits, because, the impact of the sound that hits during a scare or anything, everything kind of culminates. So it's kind of across the board. It's just the preparation, and luck is a big part of it, and just making sure that it's just a lot of work to just try and make sure it lands.
Right. It's got to be satisfying, though, for some of the theatrical screenings back in the before times when there were festivals, because you have three in here at least that are just kind of showstoppers that I wish I saw with a crowd now. Without giving them away again, like there's one that involves a fall that I think speaks to what you said. It's about timing. It's because it happens so quickly where you're already disarmed by a kind of conversation with no music. And we're all slasher fans. We love the Freddy and the Jason music cue so the scare's coming. That's fine. But like we've always maintained, Aaron and I've talked about this for years, the most amazing jump scares ever are broad daylight, or when there's not a setup, when Signs where the alien crosses the cornfield, or Richard Dreyfuss sees the head of the guy on the boat in Jaws. Totally. Like, to Jordan Peele's credit too, like humor, which shares a thing with scares, with like surprise is a big aspect of it. Like it disarms you in a good way. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty good all-timer one you had in the movie.
Cool. Yeah, it's funny because I didn't know until I played it with the big crowd. I mean, when you're in Hollywood or something like that, you're able to do test screenings and you're able to see how these things work. But when you're working on the independent scale, you can show a friend a clip or you can screen it for friends or whatever, but it's different just because they're not in that totally detached reality that, a test audience would be in. So I mean, with Z, we barely showed any people at all before our premiere. So when I finally got to see it with the crowd and that hit the most, it was kind of surprising to me because I knew it was interesting, but I didn't know it would have that kind of an impact. And that's kind of been the one thing that stayed with the film through festival to festival, where it got to the point where, if I wasn't staying in to watch the film, I would know when it would be, and I would come into the theater and film the reaction from the back because it was always really funny to hear for me, and the scare wasn't even supposed to be timed the way it was. It was different in the script where the conversation went a little bit further and it happened in another spot. So that was another editorial thing where we were able to control the timing on when it happened for the most effective, hit, because it is pretty funny what she says right before it happens.
Right. Speaking to you being an editor, producer, you're mostly self-taught to my understanding. Like you're very much a DIY director. A lot of people could learn from. You've even become quite the visual effects wizard. I know there's an anecdote out there about you. Was it a short that you had to create weather because weather failed you in a short and you ended up learning how to do snow effects?
Yeah, I did a web series pilot called Black Ice. It was in 2015 in Las Vegas. Strangely, there's a mountain called Mount Charleston about 30 minutes out of the city. And it's, the elevation climbs like crazy. And once you get up there, it's just kind of pine trees and snow generally in December, January, February. And then we had this short film, it was a 10-minute pilot that we did. And it was snowy. We scouted it. It was all snowy. And then the 1 week that we were shooting, we did this 2-day shoot up there. Everything melted. We had actors coming in from LA. We couldn't reschedule anything. We had the crew. Everybody was working for free. So we just shot it and we didn't prepare with green screens or anything like that. And it was a situation where I just shot it and I was just like, all right, I'll figure it out later. And, I've done 2 features and I did the VFX on Stillborn and Z. And I've done 3 or 4 other features already as well. And that Black Ice, the 10-minute thing was the most, the hardest thing I've ever done. It took 6 months straight of just rotoscoping every actor, adding snow to everything, doing this whole transformation. But I mean, as horrible as it was, and it never went anywhere, which is, the worst part, it was a great lesson on how to do things at least a little more appropriately when when the time comes to do it for real. So it did teach me a ton of things that I use to this day, because it was a very sink or swim moment where either I did it or the project died. So yeah, it was kind of a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, because if it had just snowed or it didn't melt, it would have saved me literally 6 months of work.
Man.
It was brutal.
I would say it was worth it for the learning experience. And I don't know, Becky, I don't know if you know this, he's helping us out with some effects on the Pale Door as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
I did all of them.
Sorry,
I did 115 shots.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well,
it's all done now.
So it's all paying off now.
Mm-hmm. It's become something that I can actually take to set, which is a great thing. If I'm shooting something and budget doesn't allow something, you're able to kind of look at things in a different light, because you go, oh, okay, I know I can fix this because I'm editing Z. I'm going to do the VFX on Z. So I know that if something's not working quite right, I do have a lot of latitude in post-production that I can kind of, eke some moments out of it. And that's something that happens, more often than you'd think when you're reshaping the story to tell in post-production. So it is definitely a great tool. I mean, it's just expanding that knowledge base so you can bring more and help more and more, fields when you're on set.
Right. Knowing what won't work too, I imagine that also comes in handy, because a lot of times
definitely.
people anticipate being able to fix something in post and then either discover it's technically can be possible in the world of digital effects, but achieving it well within budget, within a time frame, there's always constraints. So I think sometimes people have misconceptions about what is a cheap effect in post versus something that, is achievable on your budget and timeline.
It would be nice to be able to say, we'll fix it in post and not have to be referring to myself one time. Because it's always like those 5-minute fixes on set. You're just like, we don't have time. But then it ends up taking 2 or 3 days in post, full working. So, you've got 15 hours later to save you 5 minutes on set. I need to start thinking okay, let's take a breather. Let's fix this now. And then I'll save myself a massive headache later.
Right. I wonder almost if that makes you more susceptible to it because you know your skill set well enough that you're like, oh, I can easily fix that. There's so much pressure the moment of on set to, the sun's coming up, or, we're about to go into overtime, all those things. You're like, okay, even though that takes 5 minutes, we don't have 5 minutes.
Right. That's pretty much what it is. The time is so much more expensive, on set than it is when I'm sitting at home on my iMac. So that's totally the main factor, is just I can save money later because my time is worth a lot less than everybody else's.
I did want to mention something. I know found footage kind of took hold of the genre in the late 90s and has permeated since, and there's plenty of good movies that are fully handheld, but you strike me as such a controlled guy with your camera in a David Fincher vein, much more him than a Paul Greengrass, and I very much appreciate that because we were often like, why isn't that shot on sticks? But I think Fincher's the proof in the pudding that you can build tension, you can build suspense, much like Hitchcock could, without shaking the camera around. So I just wanted to give you an attaboy for that, if nothing else.
Cool.
Not a question so much as a congrats.
Thanks. I mean, Fincher is a huge influence in the way I kind of perceive cinematography. So, that's awesome if that's showing through in any way. And when we were doing Stillborn, I cut a mood reel together that was using like Gone Girl and stuff like that, just to show the way that he captures spaces and places and just makes, the audience feel just by the way he uses his camera. So he's just like a massive influence in the way that I, think about a camera. But yeah, I think it's tough sometimes to do it. I've used handheld a couple times in the films, and I try to make it at least motivated by something. But, I do like to just have like a nicely composed image that things can happen on, because I feel like there's some power in that. But it's kind of a give and take situation, because there's a lot of things you can do when you're, able to run around with an actor and get a performance. So I do think that some actors like to have that freedom where they're not 100% having to hit marks, because that's a very technical part of what can be a very emotional kind of performance. So it's a give and take for sure.
No, absolutely. I don't think I've ever been on a film shoot where 5 shots didn't become one handheld long shot, just due to time, right. The AD down your throat, it happens.
For sure. It happens all the time.
If you would, before we move into the next phase of this, will you tell us about Scaredy Cats?
Sure. Yeah. The whole quarantine thing has been going on forever. And I don't know about a lot of people, but I've turned apathetic towards a lot of work related things. I mean, all my commercial work has been canceled. So it's been a lot of just sitting around and not eating well and playing Animal Crossing. And as fun as that is, it wasn't very creatively fulfilling. So I wrote this script about a clown doll back in the early fall last year, just to have something to shoot at home without anything, just sort of as a little fun project. And I just never ended up doing it due to whatever other work or laziness, whatever it is. And so as kind of the weeks went by on this, I was just like, what am I doing? Like, I've got kids at home. I've got a couple of lights. I've got a nice camera. We should just shoot something. And the clown doll one was a little bit aggressive. So I wrote a really short one, and that was the first episode, Bunk Beds, that I did. And so I just made the kids film with me, and it wasn't easy at all. They're not actors. They've never been on camera before. So it was a lot of shooting for 30 minutes before they get tired and anxious and they run off. And so I'm like, all right, we'll pick this up tomorrow. So the first episode, it's just about Max, my younger son, scared and trying to sleep with his brother. And then it has this kind of classic creepypasta twist where there's 2 Maxes, and it's kind of just a quick 1-minute jump scare thing. And then the second one was a little bit more involved with a boy and a flashlight and a clown doll, and it's a little bit more traditional horror. But it was just fun to kind of flex the muscles a little bit, because I don't typically shoot my own stuff anymore. So it was nice to hold a camera and to kind of set up the lights and all that stuff, and get my kids involved in something that I love to do. So they don't fully love it, but they at least did the work for me. And that was a lot of fun. And even though it took us like 7 days to shoot the clown one, because, we have to shoot and then reshoot and then shoot it and reshoot it, and kind of just piece it together as we could. But I'm proud of them. I'd like to do another one soon, just to have 3, because I've got 2 out right now, and they're fun little cute things. And it's just a lot of fun to kind of use this time that I've got with my kids as to kind of have a creative outlet there.
No, I got you. So born more out of quarantine than it was a long-term plan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my brother and I are actually talking about how can the story of Scaredy Cats kind of expand over a longer period of time. So I don't know. It's interesting. I just like the idea of kids that like to be scared and like to scare each other, and having kind of like a Scooby-Doo feel with it, with or Goosebumps, where it's not totally serious and it's not life or death. It's a little more silly. So it's kind of got that kind of fun vibe.
That's so awesome. I admit I've considered kind of doing some little web series too with my daughter in the house under quarantine, because I'm like, what I just want to utilize the time differently and like get her away from screens,
Right.
screen time. And, you know, she's acted a few times for me in just like fun little shorts, nothing serious. She does enjoy it, but, you know, she's 6. So, you know, their patience and understanding of the process of making films, as you can probably relate, is tough. So, you know, what we always found is got to give her like her own silly takes, like 5 silly takes before she actually takes it seriously and does one and just wants to be done with it.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the quarantine is lifted and people are resuming whatever normalcy is after this. I didn't want to fully regret wasting my time. You know, if I was like, yeah, I built a really great island in Animal Crossing, but that's not very impressive at all. You know, so I was happy to be able to do something creative to keep some sort of creative juices going, because otherwise, you know, I don't want to look back and be like, what did I do? Where did that time go?
Yeah, well, I'm really happy with how well I've customized my operator in Call of Duty during this time. So
Great. That's funny.
All right, Brandon, if you don't mind, we'll try a little rapid fire questionnaire with you. If you're familiar with Inside the Actor Studio, it's kind of our nerdy Prowse questionnaire.
Sure.
With a few Brandon Christensen tailored questions.
Great.
Yeah, don't think too hard about it.
Yeah, first thing comes to mind, no worries.
Okay.
All right, first one. What movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
The Breakfast Club.
All right. What is your favorite horror movie franchise?
Favorite franchise? I'm going to say Saw. And I know that's weird, but I loved that it was a yearly tradition thing. And I would go to it every year in the theaters, usually alone, but it was just kind of fun to have something to look forward to. So that was fun. You know, Paranormal Activity I also saw early on, like when it was in the early, you know, invite us to your city kind of platform. And so I got to see that early, and that kind of evolved into a pretty fun series as well. I'm probably ignoring a lot of classics that people are mad at, but that's fine.
No wrong answers here.
Yeah, Saw was a lot of fun just because it was that yearly traditional thing.
Yeah, it doesn't really quite feel like October unless there's a Saw movie coming out in the theaters.
But I think that was a tagline for one of the later ones. It's like, it's not October unless it's Saw or something. And which blows my mind why this new Spiral Saw movie with Chris Rock isn't coming out in October. It's like, it was supposed to be this month, but then they just pushed it to this May next year. And I'm like, why isn't this an October movie? I don't know. Very strange.
Agreed. All right. So going back to the classics then, so we can be evened out here. What about, who's your favorite Universal monster or Universal monster movie?
I like Frankenstein because there's a lot of heart between, you know, what is humanity and all these things. It's really kind of interesting to have a character play God and, you know, deal with the repercussions. I think that's pretty cool. Agreed.
I think, Becky, that's your favorite as well, no?
Yeah. I just think it's one of the best interpretations of a sympathetic monster there is.
Totally.
Speaking of sympathetic monsters, what is your favorite Stephen King novel?
It's tough. I would either go with The Stand or It. They're both kind of the long, you know, epic tales, but I read them both pretty much back to back off each other. It took a long time to read, like over a year each, but
picked his 2 thickest novels to read back to back.
I know, it was crazy, but just the character work he does in both of them is just, you know, unbelievable. I think if I had to choose, it would probably be It, just because it has more ties to me as a person and my upbringing because of the TV series and the original novel, you know, with the green hand coming out of the sewer grate that my dad had, and now I have a copy of it, the original hardcover. There's just a lot of nostalgia tied to that, and I think that puts it over the top. But those two were, you know, hugely just, you know, incredible reads.
Okay, so now I'm really curious how you answer this next one. What is your favorite film adaptation from a Stephen King novel?
You know, it was always Frank Darabont doing the good ones. You know, when he did Shawshank, and then he did The Green Mile, and then he did The Majestic, which no one really cared about. But then he went back and he did The Mist, and all 3 of those were just so good. But then all of a sudden we have, you know, Dr. Sleep, and we have Mike Flanagan doing Gerald's Game and stuff. I mean, it's got to be either Shawshank or Gerald's Game. I loved Gerald's Game just because it's such a strange book that shouldn't, you know, they always say it was unfilmable, but he did such a terrific job with it. You know, the easy choice is Shawshank, but it's got to be Shawshank just because it's an all-timer.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mike Flanagan said that he kind of used Hush, and there's a few specific scenes in Hush where you can see this as kind of a way of experimenting with some of the mechanics he would use later in Gerald's Game. Yeah. Because when I first heard about the adaptation, I was like, how in the hell are they going to make this a movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's great though. I loved it, and it's got one of the grossest scenes I've ever seen in anything. So it's pretty it's pretty amazing. I don't know. He's operating on a whole other level right now. He's just, his output is endless, and it's, such a high level. He's, I'd love to be, approach him in some sort of way. He's definitely very influential right now. He's great.
Next, what is your favorite Steven Spielberg movie?
Raiders, maybe. That's a great one. Jaws is pretty phenomenal. I love the story behind Jaws is so cool. So I'll maybe say Jaws, because Jaws is just, he was so young making it. There's so many issues with the production that, once he got all the tools and everything of Hollywood and he became who he is, Steven Spielberg, he kind of has carte blanche to do whatever he wants now. It's not quite as interesting as it was when he was, struggling through a film and building something out of nothing. I think, I just think Jaws is so awesome, and it kind of was the first blockbuster too. So he, at such a young age, with those other guys like, Lucas and, Zemeckis and all those guys, they kind of recreated Hollywood, and Jaws was a big part of that. So I think I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. There's like 7 correct answers to that question, but yeah.
But yeah, for sure. And Jurassic Park is obviously a hugely influential film. So it's tough. I mean, it's impossible to pick one. Which is the best of the best kind of situation.
Yeah, it's like the fabric of our childhood and filmmaking love, right? It's too difficult to pick favorites.
Totally.
Speaking of difficult favorites to pick, who's your favorite all-time director?
David Fincher. I love his films. I think the Social Network's my favorite film, which is bizarre, but I think it's just like the script is so good. Aaron Sorkin's such a great writer, and just Fincher's style is just so perfect technically that it just kind of coalesces into this thing that you can turn on at any scene and you just get lost in it. And it's something that shouldn't have worked, a film about Facebook, but it's just, I've seen it probably the second most under The Breakfast Club. And it's just, every time I'm just fascinated by it.
No, that movie is phenomenal, and people who dismissed it because of the subject matter are wrong. And in fact, it holds up. We just watched it recently, and it's still so good.
So good.
Speaking of directing, what would be your dream project to direct? Like, assuming budget rights and story and all that were not an issue.
My brother wrote a novel. It's an 80s, it's a Stranger Things-esque kind of story that takes place during a time that we lived. And it's kind of loosely based on our childhood while taking some Steven Spielbergian twists and everything. And we've adapted it into a full series, and we really, really love it. It's really, really cool. It's one of those things that if, you give me however much money it costs to produce these 9 episodes, and I would drop everything and work on it. So it's kind of a cheat answer because it's something that I'm already connected to, but I've got a lot of passion for this story, and I think it's like really, really amazing. So I'd love to dive into that. And my goal has always been to be in TV. I would love to be, a Vince Gilligan type, a Damon Lindelof, where you're making a show like The Leftovers, or you're making a Breaking Bad or something like that, where it's a longer story and you're really able to take your time with it rather than, being confined to 85 to 90 minutes. I think there's just so much power in that. And, I feel like we've got something that's really awesome. It's just, how do you get to that next step? That's the hard part.
Yeah. The age old questions of like money and time and things like that.
Exactly.
That sounds really cool. So this next question gives me a little bit of nostalgia or longing at the moment, but it's about film festivals. You've certainly been to a lot over the years with your films. What is your favorite film festival experience that you've taken part in to date?
I think there's 2. The first Overlook that I did when it was their first year up at the Timberline Lodge in Portland, that was the first time I'd ever had a feature. It was my world debut of Stillborn. And it was this weird thing where everybody was trapped up on the mountain. There was nowhere else to go. So it was basically just watch movies and just hang out. And, it was a total blast. The theming was perfect. It was just, a ton of fun. And then late last year, I went to Telluride Horror, and that was just, the place is just unbelievably pretty up there. And the theaters were all really cool and fitted properly where you could experience the films right, and just the fans there and everything was so positive. So I think those 2 were the best experiences I've ever had.
Very good. We are certainly huge fans and proponents of Telluride Horror ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. It's super cool up there. It's just so unique. It kind of has the feeling of the original Overlook, where you're kind of up in this place and everybody's there for the same purpose, but just much bigger. The scale is bigger. There's more to do. There's lots of good food and everything like that. So it was, it felt like the original Overlook on steroids.
Right.
One of the most beautiful places on earth by far.
Totally.
I hope we can all get back there this year. Speaking of nostalgia and longing.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That's where, Sean and I, that was the first time we met, was at
That's right.
Telluride Horror Show. Yeah.
Winning her and Brad's trivia. Not bragging.
Yep.
That's funny.
So, Brandon, what fandom would you say you might be most ingrained with or obsessed with? Like, it could be niche or broad.
In TV and film, probably Lost, because I was a big part of just sort of the forums and stuff like that as that was happening. And I was really ingrained in the mystery and everything. And so I have a huge fondness for that series. I've got, I'm looking at my shelf beside me and I've got a bunch of the characters standing in the McFarlane dolls that they put out, or the figurines or whatever you call them. But that was just a show that was deeply influential on where I wanted to go with my career. Like when I wanted to get into TV, that was the main reason why. When I did that Black Ice, it was kind of my take on a Lost type story with no money, where it's, dealing with an accident and the fallout from that. But in video games, I guess I would probably say like Zelda or something like that. I go back to Nintendo stuff for a long, long ways, and right underneath the Lost stuff in my office is a lot of old Zelda stuff.
So you might have answered the next question. I was going to ask what your favorite video game was.
Yeah. Favorite game would be, I don't know, it'd either be like A Link to the Past or Super Metroid or something like that. One of those older, perfect Nintendo games. There's so many to pick from. It's tough, but those two kind of stand out above everything else because they're pretty much timeless.
All right, this is a leading question, but just bear with me. Who is the greatest person besides yourself to come out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada?
Oh, man. Who came out of Calgary? I can't even think. Who did come out of Calgary?
Becky's going to smack me through the Skype window, but there's a very famous wrestling family.
Oh, the Hart family. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, Brad the Hitman Hart and all his family are from Calgary.
Yeah, I did.
And they used to say that in a delay on their promos. From Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Right.
But I didn't know it, because here's the reason why, and I don't want to tangent off this too much, but like, you're Canadian, and I've never met a Canadian who does not have a particular sensibility and sense of humor. Like you've mentioned like some TV comedies you like, and you're a funny guy. I don't know any Canadians who don't have this crazy comedic sensibility, and you see like SCTV and SNL and all these amazing comedians that come out of Canada, so I don't know what it is about you guys.
I don't know. I think it's the the empathy that they have for people, where they can I think it's just like a lack of mean-spiritedness a little bit, unless you're someone like Martin Short. But I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the cold, where it just makes people huddle up and someone has to be the clown. But yeah, it does seem to be a lot of funny people come out of Canada and make their way down south. Maybe because they're crazy or something in the maple syrup. I'm not sure.
There's also a lot of great music from Canada.
Nickelback.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Earlier you were talking about music videos. I mentioned like Colin was shooting music videos in Canada in the early 2000s. I'm like, I wonder if he did a Nickelback music video.
I don't think he did. He did a lot of big artists, but I don't think he ever did Nickelback.
Okay, so what is the best concert you've ever been to, or the best concert experience besides Nickelback, of course?
Right. I've gone to a lot of like smaller independent shows because I was doing music videos with a bunch of bands and I'd want to see them perform, but I haven't been to that many big concerts. And so one that stands out was when my wife and I were first married, we went to a Michael Bublé concert on the Strip. I like Michael Bublé a lot, and the concert was great, and it was his grandma's birthday, and so he had the whole crowd sing happy birthday to her and gave her cake and everything, and that was really cool. That was a good experience. I like that a lot. So I like Michael Bublé's music just in general. So, put those two together and it was great. I've never been to like a giant, a Kanye show or a big AC/DC type show. So maybe my opinion would change if I had, but, I've only been to, a small handful, and that one stands out.
What would be your walk-on music? Like if you were a ball player or a wrestler coming in for your TED Talk, what would be your walk-up entrance music?
Smash Mouth is always a hit, no matter where you are. I could put on All Star. That's pretty great.
I just got in half the listeners' heads. I can't help it.
Yeah, that song's a real ear burner. I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be funny to have Smash Mouth because, I mean, when you're like a Mariano Rivera type and you have Enter Sandman, it kind of brings chills on everybody, both sides of the field, because they're like, oh shit, it's Mariano Rivera. Both teams are saying that. So it's like, it's tough to pick a song like that would instill that kind of feeling, because that's what it is. I mean, when you had that glass shatter and Stone Cold comes out and Stone Cold Steve Austin, like everybody just feels it. So it's such a hard thing because you never know what's going to hit. It's like personality plus music. They kind of create this perfect thing. I'm just going to stick with Smash Mouth.
After your, Bublé and the Canadian sensibility, I feel like you could come out to Bublé and really disarm people.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, that's classy. He's a classy man.
Right.
So last question. So once all the social distancing and quarantining is over, what's the first restaurant you're going to go to and sit down and have a nice meal at?
Well, I've got 3 kids, so nice meal is out the window. I don't know. I think it'll probably be, oh man. I mean, my wife and I, we don't really go out to eat that often. So it's, oh man, this is not good.
Well, maybe there's an activity you're going to do, like go to a movie or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would like to go to, I coach both my kids in Little League, and I'm excited for that to come back. So it's, it's always been the fall. We do winter ball and then we do spring ball, and we played 1 game this season and then everything got stopped. So I am looking forward to that. I don't know. Las Vegas has a ton of great food, but I'm up in the suburbs, and so we've got a lot of chain stuff. There's not really that excitement there. I do love Capriati's sandwiches. Those are terrific. They're still open though, so I could technically go there now, or at least they do curbside. We make a lot of food at home. It's a boring answer.
No, it's all good. You said you had 3 children, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's as good an excuse as there is.
Right. You don't want to go anywhere. Expensive and annoying.
Right. That's it for the official Rapid Fire 15.
Okay.
So just before we let you go, there's a couple things we want to say. As of right now, you guys should all have Shudder. If not, free trial always. I think you can get 7 days free. You should have Shudder. Z is now on Shudder. Absolutely worth a watch. If Brandon hasn't sold you enough, then we will continue to do so. If you watch the movie, do him a favor, promote it, tweet it, share it, tag it. Tag Shudder, tag the filmmaker. I don't think Brandon would have any qualms about you doing so, because that stuff helps independent filmmakers.
But only if you like it. Don't be a jerk.
Well, they're going to like it because it's good.
Yeah.
I think Shudder right now is actually doing a thing where it's a 30-day free trial right now during the quarantine. If you use offer code SHUDDIN, SHUTIN. So I believe they've still got that going on.
And Stillborn was a success for Shudder. Do they have any plans to do a shut-in with you, or has that been talked about?
To do a shut-in with me?
Like the one where you tweet along with it, during the film.
So Joe Bob's going right now, so I know that they were kind of putting a lot of their focus onto that. But once that's over, we've discussed potentially doing one. I'd love to do it. There's just kind of like a running commentary, but I do have a lot to say about the, moment to moment things in the film. So I think that would be a lot of fun.
And we're in a bit of a holding pattern. Everybody is with production right now, but do you have anything concrete coming up, or what's next for you?
I have a new script that we were actually supposed to be shooting right now, but everything got pushed. So I'm just, once this is all over, hopefully, I'll be able to jump back into that pretty quickly. But it's another feature. It's another horror film, and there's no moms being scared in it. So it's a totally different thing for me.
Yes. Bless your wife and children. Because not only were you doing these tormenting films from afar, but now you're doing it with them with scaredy cats.
Right. For sure. I need to scare them somehow.
And where can people find you online?
On Instagram, I'm the Brandon Christensen, and then on Twitter, I'm the Brandon C85, because you can't have very long handles on there. I'm pretty new to Twitter, so I'm still kind of learning the ropes there. I'm about 10 years late.
It's a hellscape. You'll get used to it. Lose faith in humanity once a day when you're on it.
Right,
but
sure.
No, Brandon, we appreciate the time very much, and please, everybody, like I said, promote, tweet, share, tag, check out Z on Shudder. And Brandon, thank you again for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.